The world has never seen an oil shock quite like this in recent memory. Certainly not in the last generation. Oil has crossed $100 a barrel, surging past 110, even touching 119 at its peak, as oil depots, tankers and petroleum terminals across the Middle East are targets of choice in this Iran war. Attacked, ablaze, and some of them even shutting down. Now, those burning skies which have become the face of this entire war over Tehran and the Gulf, that is the face, that is the picture that you think of when you think of what's happening in the Middle East right now. A fifth of the world's entire crude and natural gas supply, by the way, has been completely suspended. US crude posted its largest weekly gain on record, and prices are still climbing. For India, an energy-hungry nation that imports 90% of its crude oil and holds about 50 days of strategic reserves, this is nothing short of a crisis, even if India is admittedly better placed than many other countries. Indian officials have pledged to protect consumers as prices blow past $100, calling it a significant risk for inflation and trade. Delhi is, as you can imagine, in full crisis management mode. To you, my friends, watching, this oil shock isn't just some distant, obscure business metric, especially since the war in the Middle East is far from over. This concerns you and will have an impact on your life, your expenses, the choices you make. I'm going to explain exactly what this oil shock is and why. Wherever you are, it concerns you directly. So I want to break down for you in the simplest of terms what is pushing oil prices. You, of course, know that there is a war in the Middle East, but how does this actually work? What is pushing the oil prices to these record levels? Number one, the Strait of Hormuz, through which much of the world's oil actually is transported. It's a key oil route that has been blocked for the last 9 days during this war. It caters to 20%, viewer, 20% of the global fuel supply, and it is unable to do so because that entire strait is currently blocked. Over 700 tankers are stuck due to the war and the restrictions imposed by Iran. Oil is not reaching its destination. So that's reason number one. Number two, attacks on energy infrastructure on both ends. Iran has hit oil terminals in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain. Facilities have shut down. Supply has been squeezed or reduced in places like Aramco in Saudi Arabia. Some of the largest producers of oil are feeling the heat literally. Then there is a risk to oil producers. Major exporters are in the conflict zone. We're talking about obviously the biggest oil producers, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain. All of these countries, remember, have been hit so far by Iran and continue to be hit. Markets fear supply cuts if the war extends even further, and it obviously will. Markets panic. They hate uncertainty. Traders are expecting a supply shock. Prices are rising even before any real shortage kicks into effect. And therefore, this uncertainty is also driving up prices. Now, let's show you about the war on oil and gas and how it's actually playing out. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia, the world's largest producer of oil first. Aramco refinery was struck by Iran. It gave us that big breaking story just days after the war began. It's the world's largest oil producing company. In Qatar, LNG complex targeted by Iran similarly. It's the world's largest liquefied natural gas facility, also targeted. Then you come to little Bahrain, Bapco oil refinery struck by Iran. It's a key fuel production site. Move over to the United Arab Emirates, the Fujairah oil terminal, also targeted by Iran. It's the world's largest oil storage hub. Then you come to Oman, the port of Duqm hit by Iran, major energy export terminal, and that is completely out of commission right now. In Iran, the Karj Island oil terminal has been hit by Israel. It handles 90% of Iran's crude exports. Much of it also goes to India. The Strait of Hormuz, like I just showed you, it's been blocked since almost the beginning of this war. It was blocked just 2 days after the first shots were actually fired. It handles 20% of global oil and gas movement, and that is completely blockaded. Now, this oil crisis basically means that everything actually becomes a crisis. Now, let's show you why oil crisis has an impact on pretty much everything. You pay more for petrol and diesel, which means there is a higher cost of living. That's one of the instant effects of this. Inflation rises as transport costs go up. That's the second big impact of it, which is why you are not in some way disconnected from what is actually going on. Then the third big impact of this, let's keep moving on the graphic. The third direct impact on household budgets, obviously. More impact, more expense on fuel means low disposable income. Banks raise interest rates to combat inflation. Higher cost of home and car loans. Impact on job costs surge for industries dependent on fuel. Airlines, shipping, trucking, businesses, corporates, they all feel the heat because transportation costs increase as a result of oil prices, higher ticket prices and freight charges from travel to cargo. Everything becomes more expensive if there's an oil shock. Expensive travel and shipping. If demand goes down, companies have to cut jobs. Then, of course, there's always the currency impact, and we've seen the rupee take a tumble. For oil importing countries like India, and we get 90% of our oil from the outside viewer, something to think about. High prices widen trade deficit as imports become costlier. Trade deficit leads to a weakening of the currency, and it has happened today. Fiscal impact, government may be pressured to cut fuel taxes, less money with the government for infrastructure and social spending, which is a big deal in a country like India, which has massive and very, very expensive social and infrastructure spend. So let's try and understand what this oil shock really means and what the road ahead really looks like. How should we interpret it? How should we navigate it? And how well prepared is India? Joining me live now is Swasti Rao, consulting editor for The Print. She's also a well-known commentator and columnist on international and strategic affairs. Swasti, welcome. And R.S. Sharma, the former chairman and managing director of ONGC, the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation. Thank you very much to the both of you for joining me. Swasti, I'd like to come to you first. A simple question. How bad is it? We've seen what happened today as far as the oil shock was concerned. There was a correction after that as well. But, is it going to get worse? How are you reading what happened today and what lies ahead?
Well, Trev, as you said, that the real problem is about uncertainty, because so far we have not seen physical shortages in India. But if I was very keenly listening to all the, various data points that you were mentioning, which are all very, very crucial to understand, because the real problem for us right now is like I said, the looming uncertainty. I mean, for the first ever time, Brent has crossed the $100 per barrel mark after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And as you know, I mean, if you look at India's import basket, you can totally see why we are so sensitive. That's one. The second, of course, you mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Strait of Hormuz, if you look at the data, there were an average of about 150 barrel. If you look at some data points, others would say around 100. But nonetheless, in that range, vessels that were passing every day, which is now sort of averaging, below 10. And many of those are getting attacked. Many of those are being identified. They are trying to identify themselves as Chinese ships, to try and avoid any attack. So the situation remains precarious and very unpredictable. And that is the reason that, speculatively speaking, we see all these jumps. Now, it jumped 42%, it got down. And then that is, I think, at a very, very good time. In fact, today morning only, I was noticing that Donald Trump actually could show the acumen to really say, at least at the right time, that the G7, along with the IEA countries and most of these organizations, there are more than 30 countries there that hold 1.2 billion barrels of reserve oil, and they are thinking of, releasing about 25 to 35% of that reserves. I mean, big strategic reserves they are, which is about 300 million to 400 million barrels of oil. Now, just that news, not a decision. The decision has not been made, but just the news was enough to sort of ease some pressure on the oil. I mean, so that's what we are seeing. Now, just to quickly go back and to answer your bigger question was that, the war is now in its second week, of course, and the way I see it, I think both sides are trying very hard to achieve their military targets. Vishnu did a wonderful, primer on what really is the problem, how far is Iran striking, what is the interception rate, etc. But I see that they have been not able to deliver any political objectives. Okay, what is the political objective of what is happening? So wars are simply not being fought out on the military, so to say, the battlefield, but ultimately there has to be a rationale behind it. I also see that despite Iran doing what it is doing, it has not been able to drive any wedge, so to say, between United States, Israel, and the Gulf partners. I think that is also pretty commendable. That decepting. So that's on the one hand, and when it comes to Iran, I mean, you do see that the regime remains very, very defiant. You do see that there has been a massive degrading of all the stockpiles, but they continue to have capacities, particularly when it comes to drones, to target all this American soft belly and all these, desalination plants, etc. So the larger point being unpredictability, very, very problematic. And the second point being, we don't know the political objective yet.
Mr. R.S. Sharma, the general sense we're getting from inside the government is that about 50 days of strategic reserves. Consumers will be, obviously prioritized to cushion them from any oil shock that could, boil down to the individual. How, as a former chairman of ONGC, one of our big, oil corporates, how do you see India's preparedness for what's happening, sir?
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Shiv, inviting me for the show.
Good to have you, sir.
And you have very correctly analyzed, summarized, and my compliments to Swasti also. She had given a very great macro level view. I will confine, my responses to this oil shock, oil prices, how it impacts and how it can be managed. It is unprecedented situation, undoubtedly first time ever, Strait of Hormuz getting closed, and first time we see sudden spike in the prices because of the real fear of the supplies getting restricted and how the consumption would be met. But, by evening prices have eased down because this G7 nations, it seems they are agreeing to release from strategic reserves about 400 million barrels. That's a good welcome news. But I would like to give you one comfort rather through you to all the viewers. So it is a critical situation, but certainly not alarming to the extent we get unnerved.
Okay.
When I was heading ONGC in 2007, crude oil prices had reached $155 a barrel. And I can only tell you that got very effectively managed by the government. And I have seen over the years, our bureaucracy, leadership, they have risen to the occasion time and again, and they have delivered the best comfort to the masses.
Okay.
So here also, I can see similar kind of situation emerging, and I can also foresee the kind of measures they were taken at that point of time. Those measures can be taken. But one thing I would like to clearly convey through you to the viewers, to the common man, that this is a difficult situation. Everybody has to feel the pain.
Yeah.
Government has to also to enforce some demand discipline. How that demand discipline will come? To my mind, they shouldn't hesitate raising the product prices at this moment. By creating right kind of awareness, Parliament in its session, they should take the houses into confidence and say this is an unprecedented kind of situation, and we are taking these measures to give the least hit to the common man, and also convey to the common man they have to tighten their belt, they have to support the government. This is the time, instead of trying to criticize each other, we need to stand together and really see that how in the most effective manner
we can face this. Mr. Sharma, it's very heartening to hear the words you're saying, because even the government has echoed that, that sentiment and said basically that India is in a better position today, to sort of manage what is going on than many other countries. Swasti, I'm going to come to you about that in just a moment, but I just want to also throw in a little bit more information, about this domino effect. The Hormuz domino is not just about oil. It's tempting to look at this as just about oil, but it isn't. Far from it. There's sulfur, 92% comes from oil and gas. It's the most produced chemical on earth and is a precursor for an entire swath of industries that the world depends on. Sulfuric acid is copper and cobalt extraction. No sulfur means no electric vehicle batteries, for instance. Then you've got the Taiwan tangle. 30% of Taiwan gas comes from Qatar. Taiwan produces 90% of the world's semiconductor chips. Taiwan's gas reserves 11 days, just 11 days. No gas means no power, means no semiconductor chips. 90% of the world's chips. Then there's the food question. 33% of global fertilizers move through the strait. Nitrogen fertilizers are critical to global agriculture. So it's not just oil, it's also all of these things. Swasti, coming back to you on that quick question of India being better prepared than other countries. Is that just something that the government is saying, or is it borne out by data and by facts and by some of the precedents that Mr. Sharma also mentioned? Swasti.
Okay, so Shiv, very quickly on this, I do see India being, less impacted in a direct fashion, when it comes to all this, simply because there is a geographical distance that we have from this conflict region. That's one. Also because, we have had the option. I'm sure we have discussed much about how we got that waiver of 30 days, etc. But of course, the Indian position is that India would take its decision to go back to Russian oil, and it has done that. And in fact, if you look at the data, Russia still tops as the topmost exporter of oil to India, although it is down from where it was earlier in the previous year. So, of course, we have more diversified, sources. One. Second, we are also geographically away from there. But like you mentioned, it is very much true that, this is a kind of a cascading effect. You cannot overstate the importance of how all these supply chains are connected.
Yeah.
And like I said, that I think it is just taking us, it is coming in phases, but it has really been a big lesson for us. COVID taught us a lesson, then Russia-Ukraine war taught us another lesson, and now the Middle Eastern crisis is teaching us another lesson. I mean, we have to rethink this entire discussion on how to build resilience. And my last point here, which is very important,
yes,
we have to ask ourselves this very uncomfortable question on why on earth do we keep remaining so reliant on imports? What about having a more educated discussion on how do we push our domestic production? I mean, how many more crises are we going to take, to really get
this is something that really, strikes a chord with me. And I think that really needs to be the big takeaway. I'm out of time on this segment, but I really appreciate both R.S. Sharma and Swasti Rao for joining me on this. You've given us a great deal to think about. I have a big exclusive interview now coming up.